Hi, Charles SirBookSage here, and welcome to another Sunday live stream. I'm continuing my discussions about the season 2 of Amazon's Wheel of Time. If this is your first time here, hi, this is my SirBookSage channel. I talk about science fiction and fantasy. I'm usually in the middle of some very long series, be it a book series or in the middle of watching something science fiction, fantasy, or superhero comic book related in terms of either film, TV, live action, anime, all that stuff. Anyway, today I'm continuing my kind of journey through season 2 of The Wheel of Time. I have read the entire Wheel of Time book series. I consider it one of the greatest fantasy stories ever written. I highly recommend reading it. If you're a fantasy person who hasn't read The Wheel of Time yet, absolutely recommend it. It is a story that sticks the landing. It's worth the 14, 15 book journey. Now, the Amazon TV show, however, is another matter altogether. And I want to talk today about episode 4, which aired a couple of days ago. And this is Daughter of the Night. And this show continues to frustrate me because there are things in it that I quite like, and then there are things in it that I really, really dislike. Again, this is a very up and down show for me. Now, I will say this about episode 4. At this point, I have no belief that this show actually has any interest in telling the story that's in the books. They're pretty much, I don't know if anything in this episode is straight out of the books all that much, maybe some tiny bits. But overall, they're pretty much doing their own thing here. There's certain highlight points that in the story that the show is hitting, but the actual events that are happening are pretty far removed from the books at this point. But I do want to go through what actually happened in this episode because there was some pretty interesting things. Thematically, this was actually quite an interesting episode in that this episode was all about family in many different ways. You have House Damodred in Carhian, which is where Moiraine is from. That's her family. We kind of address that. We have Lanfear talking about her son. We have Nynaeve grieving over losing a family that's not even real, still like traumatized a bit from her experience in that third arch. And we get to meet Alana Sedai's kind of extended family in this episode as well. So, and even Selene, who they finally do the reveal of who Selene is in this episode. Even Selene, hers isn't so much family as it is she's beginning to talk more and more about this particular relationship from her past that you can tell has resonated with her and traumatized her in many different ways. And as book readers, we know we know who she's talking about and what relationship in particular she's talking about. And one of the moments that I actually liked in this episode is Rand says something to her right in the final scene that the poor guy doesn't understand is just going to wreak havoc for his whole rest of his journey. Because he said something you don't say to Lanfear if you're Rand al'Thor. And so, yeah, but we'll get to that. But one of the things that I disliked about this episode was how little time it's spent with each character or in each scene. This episode is just jumping back and forth all over the place. There's a lot of characters we're following, and this episode we go, okay, here's Lan for 30 seconds. Here's Moiraine for 30 seconds. Here's Nynaeve for 30 seconds. Here's Leandrin and Nynaeve talking for 30 seconds. It's like boom, 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 all throughout the episode. There was only maybe 3 scenes. It felt like about 3 scenes that actually got to sit and breathe, where characters actually got to talk a bit more than just a quick, here's what's happening, here's what you need to know, okay, on to the next person. So this is much more, I think, of a logistics, production, storytelling choice. This is the halfway point of the season, so I think they were just trying to fit in like all these sort of pins that are preparing you for the second half of season 2. And a lot of this episode, they just had to hop around so many times between everybody to just kind of set everything up to go forward here. Because by the end of this episode, we see some of the characters beginning to finally make decisions to start taking some action. Because this is a 1 hour episode, or roughly about an hour, where very little actually happened. But there were a lot of little, like, again, set up things for what's coming in the second half of the show. But there was some actually very interesting moments here, and some extremely frustrating moments as well, which has been this viewing experience as a book reader watching this TV show. Again, if you are watching the show and you haven't read these books, I'd love to hear in the comments, or if you're here watching this live in the live chat or in the comments later, what you think of it, because I have no idea how this reads to someone who doesn't know the story. I mean, for all I know, the people who aren't aware of the actual story in the books might be loving this show, because it has some very interesting fantasy elements to it. And you don't have any preconceived notions having not read the book, so it just might be a fun or interesting fantasy show to you. As a book reader, it continues to be very frustrating. But I want to get into the specifics of what happens in the episode. We get another cold open. That's just pretty standard now for the Wheel of Time to expect a cold open. And the good part about this one is it's a cold open that is set up for a payoff later in the episode. This cold open actually sets up the finale of the episode, and finally gives us a big reveal that, like I said, us book readers have been waiting to get. And as far as how the show is handling this, I think they did a good job in the reveal, just from the context of this show, not the context of the actual story in the books. But we'll get to that. So the cold open is, we see Ishamael, and he's walking through this sort of narrow, path between these high, narrow cliffs. And he comes into a chamber, and there's one of these seals of the Dark One's prison. And I don't recall this being the case in the books when it came to those seals. But in a TV show, they're using the seals as a combination of seals that trap the Dark One in his prison, but each seal also seems to represent one of the Forsaken. And there's some Wheel of Time channels that are deep dive, go deep into the lore. And there's some live streams where they've spent multiple hours trying to decipher the design of each of these sort of Quendiar symbols. Because if you go back to the Eye of the World and you see the pattern on the ground, it's the sort of yin-yang, sort of old Aes Sedai pattern, plus there's all these little designs around it. And you saw some of that in the cold open for the show. And outside that tower, you see a similar thing. So the show is doing an interesting little twist on these seals by making each one seem to relate to a particular Forsaken. So I imagine as each individual shield weakens, the show's just going to have that release that Forsaken. And this scene here is Ishamael releasing one of the other Forsaken. So now on the show, he's not the only Forsaken running around now. Now, if you look at the text translating his dialogue, it just said speaking the old tongue. It's not actually translating his words at first. But if you listen, you hear him say Lanfear. So you realize, oh, okay, the book readers know this is a flashback, cold open. Because obviously Lanfear has already been released in this season, because, that's the reveal that's coming as to who Lanfear is. But again, a very well done, simple, straightforward, cold open. And it gives us Ishamael saying, blood feeds blood, blood calls blood, blood is, blood was, and blood shall ever be. And then he's talking about the daughter of the night. And this is Lanfear. So you realize it's Lanfear who's being woken up if you, again, have read the books. And again, a nice opening scene, sets the tone, sets the mood, and kind of sets up that, okay, we're going to get the Lanfear reveal in this episode, because we've been waiting for that. I was wondering to see when that was going to come. And then we switch, and then we get into the episode itself. And like I said, this is a very family-centric episode, because we go from here we go to Moiraine. And Moiraine, we go to Carhaen, the city, and we see Lady Anvair. I'm not sure how to pronounce her name. She gets a brief mention in the books, but they're fleshing out her character here in the show. It's the noble woman that talked to Ran at the party Celine took him to. The one she was kind of talking to him, and she watched him throw the invitation from the other noble house in the garbage. We're back to her, and we're seeing her like donning her armor, or what her version of armor is as a noble woman in Carhaen, and which is her putting her makeup on, putting her wig on, putting the fashion of the day on, that kind of stuff. Basically presenting the part of a noble lady of a noble house of the city, because you play the great game of houses there, and that Carhaen is the centerpiece, the center place of the great game. And she's a noble woman, so she's grown up her whole life playing this sort of game. And it has a name in the books, I can't remember offhand, but it's something that this politics really impacts a lot of what plays out in the overall story. But we see her, and she's getting ready for her day, and then she's kind of reposing in her sort of lounge, and then she has a visitor come, and it turns out to be Moiraine. And we learn that Moiraine is Anvair's older sister. And though obviously the lady looks older than Moiraine because Moiraine's an Aes Sedai, and the Aes Sedai age slow. So it's reminding us of a dynamic that they showed us in the previous episode, where the man that Liandrin has sort of bedridden somewhere, stashed away in Tar Valon in the town, is her son, who's now much older than her. So we see that similar age disparity here between family members in this scene as well. And I don't know what to think about how they're portraying Moiraine in this season, because Moraine's entire story here is mostly made up for season 2, because she just isn't present in the books all that much at this point. So the show has her lose her powers and then have her have this sort of contentious relationship with Lan, trying to push Lan away, and then her going and doing this stuff here. So this is all just trying to give her something to do, because the show has decided that Moiraine is mostly the main character in the TV show, instead of Rand al'Thor, who is clearly the main character in the books. But she's come to Carhaen because she's looking for information, and she basically is just rude to her sister. She's like, I'm here, I'm going to use my room, I'm going out. And Moiraine, being how Moiraine has been this season so far, just being very curt with everyone. Everyone is just there as a means to an end, and she's not interested in feelings or discussion or conversation. She needs what she needs, and she'll use who she has to use to get it. So, and they're really leaning heavy into that aspect of Moiraine, which you do see a bit more subtly, I think, overall in the books as you go along. But Moiraine is very manipulative, like all the Aes Sedai are. This show has her just very starkly just being blunt, which I'm not necessarily the biggest fan of, but again, there's the TV show version of characters and there's the book version of characters. And there's a lot of times they're not going to be presented with the same sort of goals or drive or reactions to things. And to give you an analogy, if you go to Catelyn Stark in the Game of Thrones TV show, in the show, Catelyn is very much against Ned accepting the king's offer to become Hand of the King and come south to King's Landing. She doesn't want him to go. But in the books, Kat is the one pushing him to go. She wants him to go down there because she's from a southern house and she's used to that political game of Westeros. And one of the things I think she really dislikes about Winterfell is it's so far north of the rest of the continent. She feels like cut off from the political power in terms of continent-wide political power, Westeros-wide political power. And she wants her family back in that game because that's how she grew up as a Tully. But, the TV show, Kat is very, against it, very worried about it. And it works for the TV show version of the character. And you see these motivations changed a lot when you have movies or TV shows from how they might have been if it's a real life person or if it's just adapting a book. You see that even in the Lord of the Rings. Some of the character motivations and how they react or feel about themselves is a bit different. But you weave it into how you're presenting the character in that particular medium. And in this show, this is how they're presenting Moiraine in particular, having her be much more blunt when she's very single-minded and single-focused on something. And she's, I guess, learning how to maneuver not having the one power, but she's also not telling anybody outside of her close confidence. Her sister doesn't know she can't necessarily channel right now, so she can use her presence as an Aes Sedai to get what she wants out of people, because people are just going to assume she can channel. They're not going to know otherwise. And she's certainly not going to take away an effective weapon, even if it's a weapon of influence and not of power. But she's come to Carian because she is, she's here on business, she's after something, and then the scene ends. And like I said at the beginning, this whole episode, it's just 30 seconds with Moiraine, and then it's off to Rand for 30, 40 seconds, and then it's to the next person, and back and forth, boom, 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 boom. So it takes a little bit before the show settles in and starts giving us stuff. But then we cut to Rand, who's there in Carian as well, and in the foregate, not in the noble part of town, and he's like shoveling this burnt up debris from burning most of Celene's business and apartments down. And Celene's there, and she's basically giving Rand a kind of a fake backstory about herself. Because if you're paying attention, Selene is manipulating Rand. She's using him. She's interested in something that she believes he can provide. But you don't really know as the viewer, if you haven't read the books, you don't know what she's after or what her end game is, what her interests are. You just know that, she's kind of like trying to keep this kid reeled in. But again, it's just there briefly, just reminding us what happened at the end of the last episode, and then we're on to the next person, which is now we bounce over to Nynaeve. And Nynaeve is struggling, dealing with the trauma, like grief and loss, even though she knows intellectually what she experienced in that third arch. Staying there for so long, marrying Lan, having a daughter, and then watching them all being slaughtered. She knows intellectually it wasn't real, but she feels it as though it was real. And part of her wonders, was it really real anyway? Could she have stayed there and lived out a full life? So she's struggling with this grief and trauma as a result. And she's pretty closed off. And Egwene shows up because Egwene, is like adrift. She's come here with Nynaeve. She feels completely alone and isolated. She's got this sort of burgeoning friendship with Elaine, the daughter of Arandor, who's come as a novice as well. And they're like neighbors. They share the rooms right next to each other. I think they're roommates in the book, but they have their own room here. But Egwene is trying to comfort Nynaeve, and she's just trying to figure out how to fit into the tower. And now that she's still a novice and Nynaeve isn't accepted, the dynamic between them has changed because of the tower politics. And so Egwene's just kind of a bit lost and doesn't know what to do. But then we're on to Lan. And I just continue to be just really annoyed at this character they're calling Lan that we're getting in this TV show. Lan is just, his hair's down. He looks like the Lan from Nynaeve's vision in the arch. He's hanging out, eating some food, meditating, doesn't know what he wants to do. And everyone around him is like, you okay, buddy? You're not going to self-delete? You're all right? I know Moiraine abandoned you, and usually when waters are cut off from their Aes Sedai or they lose them, they kind of delete themselves out of existence. But, she's not dead, so don't do that. They're showing concern for Lan because, we're getting to see the waters and how they interact with each other and what their relationships with their own Aes Sedai are like. Because each relationship, Aes Sedai water, is different. Each one is a unique kind of connection and unique relationship. But what we see here is Lan is now with Alana, and Alana's waters. Alana has come from the White Tower with her two waters, and she's visiting her family. So it's a whole big family, and they're having sort of a meal outside, and Lan is there with them. And just kind of getting the feel again, this, the show is, like exemplifying family and the different family dynamics each of these people have. And again, what this show is doing to Lan, I have no idea. We cut away to Lan, and Lan is like taking a piss against a tree. Now, this is not what you would expect when you heard, oh, they're going to be making a live-action Wheel of Time. I can't wait to see Lan fighting Trollocs and going into the Blight and killing and being that stoic warrior he is. And no, Lan is just sitting around in his fields. So he's pissing against a tree. He's feeling downtrodden. So, again, where's the Lan from the books? You don't know Lan from the books if you're only watching the show and haven't read the story. But Alana has come to talk to him, and she's trying to puzzle out like what Lan wants to do. Where's he going to go? Since Moiraine has basically told him to F off. And she extends an invitation to say, come to the White Tower. Me and my warders, we're going back to the White Tower. So come with us. There's need there. And he says, and she tells him Nynaeve is taking her accepted test. So, which means it's not too far off from when she'll be raised to an Aes Sedai, and Nynaeve's going to need a water. So you should be there and be with her and begin, take the next journey of your life as a warder, and just forget about Moiraine. And Alana talks to Lan here and tells him that she's known Moiraine a long time, and Moiraine was very different when she was younger, but something happened, and Moiraine has never been the same ever since. Now, this is something that they hinted at last season, and again, having read the books, they're talking about Moiraine and Siuan Sanche when they were, I believe, accepted, at being present, and I think it was the Amerlin's keeper, suddenly having this vision and crying out that the dragon has been reborn on the slopes of Dragon Mount. And I think that's really what Alana's referring to, but Alana just doesn't know, what happened. But as a book reader, you know that that's what it was. And I'm expecting we're going to get a flashback at some point showing that scene, hopefully. Since from the trailers we see what clearly looks like a flashback between Moiraine and Siuan, I'm hoping that we get that scene. Because that is a scene that a lot of book readers want to see. We want to see that moment where the dragon, where the tower realizes, or just these four women in this room realize that the dragon's been reborn. But anyway, that's the first scene that we get a little bit of time to breathe. But then it's back to bouncing around now. And we're back to Moiraine and Cairhien. And Moiraine she goes into the foregate trying to find Rand, and then she goes to the sanitarium and uses her, I'm an Aes Sedai, I'm going to talk to Logain, and they let her right in. And this is where we get to, I think, what is annoying me most about this show so far. It's complete and utter disregard for the lore of the actual One Power. The show has no regard for the One Power. Again, still hasn't explained Sidon and Sidar to its viewing audience. Sidon is the male half of the One Power that only men can channel. Sidar is the female half of the One Power that only women can channel. This distinction is critical to the story in the books. Show still continues to make no mention of this distinction. But Logain was gentled in season 1, which means Logain can no longer touch the source. He can no longer channel. And only someone who can channel can train someone else in how to channel. If you can't channel, you can't train someone else how to do it, because you have to show them. You have to channel and show them what you're doing. Let them see and feel out the weaves and learn the weaves themselves. You can't just talk to them and teach them verbally how to do it. It doesn't work that way. But in this show, Rand went there because he wants Logain to help him. And Moiraine is there. I want you to train Rand. Have you started training Rand yet? And I want you to train him and train him to the fullest of your ability. And if I'm satisfied that you've trained him properly, she shows him this knife. He says, I'll give you this knife so you can end your life. Because everyone who's either been gentled or stilled eventually loses all desire to be alive. So, but again, Logain has been gentled. He cannot train Rand. And the fact that the show is just completely just changing that. It's like, so the one power is at the center of this entire story. And the show just has no interest in even remotely following the one power from the books. They're breaking all of its rules, which means I don't know how they're going to tell this story without these rules in place. Because it's going to make a lot of what happens pointless if they're not following the structure of this power and how it works. I mean, there's a pretty massive, massive, massive moment that comes deep into the books that like is transformational when it comes to the one power. And there's no need for it. There'd be no need for it if the structure of side on and side art don't exist in this TV show. So we'll see. I'm still holding out hope that at some point they're going to have to actually explain this to the audience. But who knows? So, again, a very, very frustrating scene because it just shatters the core foundation of how the one power works in the books. So it's, again, a completely different story without the one power and how it's structured and works in the books. So, again, this lack of interest in what makes the story in this TV show is really just continues to be very disappointing. But again, we're off to now back to the White Tower. It's Egwene and Elaine. Egwene is just kind of talking to Elaine. They're continuing to bond. You know, I don't know if this show is presenting this bond as so it's two people genuinely having a sort of connection that sometimes people become friends very quick. Or if it's, well, Egwene's like, I ain't got no one else to talk to, so I'm talking to you. And it's just forming because Egwene just doesn't have anywhere else to go, anyone else to open up and talk to. Don't know. But again, just a very quick conversation. And then we bounce to another one again. This is this episode over and over and over and over and over, just so short with everybody. And then we are back to Nynaeve, and Nynaeve goes down to the water yard looking for Alana's waters, who, again, they're not at the White Tower at this point. And then we see Leandrin watching her, and then someone walks to Leandrin and hands her a parchment. And then we switch to Leandrin now. We're done with Nynaeve. It's just her having a quick conversation with a warder who's basically hitting on her. Like, you know, wondering, hey, when are you going to be available for us to bond to you? But Leandrin then goes and confronts Leanne. And this is another thing I'm interested in here. Leanne is the keeper of the tower. She's basically the right-hand person of the Amyrlin seat. When the Amyrlin's not present, the keeper speaks with the voice of the Amyrlin. And Leanne's been there, but they haven't really done any work kind of explaining that role, that job, its importance, its influence. It's just something I guess you're expected to just sort of just pick up on your own. I like the character. I like the casting of Leanne. I'm curious to see if she's going to get the journey her character gets in the books. No idea at this point, because the show doesn't seem all that interested in the plot of the books. When it comes to a lot of these people. So I have no idea, but it'll be very interesting to see if Leanne does get that plot. Because here she's presenting as I'm keeper, and she's trying to hold the dignity of that office. And then the journey she's going to go on later, she has to present a very different part of her personality, something that she kind of keeps suppressed at the tower. So I'm really looking forward to where they take her later. But at least they're beginning to introduce her into the show, as a presence in the White Tower that has to be reckoned with. But we get more of Leandrin just trying to find out where's the Amerlin? Why isn't she here? There's reports of an invasion in the west, and why is the tower ignoring it? And Leanne tells her, "We've sent sisters, and just we'll let you know if you need to know anything." And Leandrin basically threatens the Amerlin and her. She's like, if the Amerlin falls, you fall with her, and then walks away. And Leandrin continues to be the most interesting thing in terms of as far as changes from the book character, because Leandrin in the books is a very one note like villain in the books. There's not a lot to her. But I think, and I don't know if it's just that the actress has just brought out some new aspect to the character, and then now the writers are now writing for the actress and expanding the character's sort of role. But it's not surprising, again, in the story of this magnitude with as many characters as there are in it, that Leandrin is going to basically accomplish what a lot of just various Aes Sedai might accomplish in the actual books. That Leandrin is just going to take on all those activities. So it makes sense to give her this sort of expanded role here, especially in this early part of the story. And again, she's probably the highlight of this episode for me easily. And she's one of the things that I actually like in terms of a change that's an improvement from the books. Because she does play an important role, and I'm happy that she's far more interesting here in this TV show than she is in the books. I don't know if you can hear these birds, but there's a bunch of birds on these electric wires out there that are just having an entire conversation. Hopefully you can't hear it, but it's loud. Okay, so not bad, but then we're on to Perrin again. Perrin. Okay, here we are, 4 episodes in, and finally, Elias and Perrin have a conversation about what Perrin is going through. And Elias is telling Perrin, it's like, you're a wolf brother, and there's not many of us, but you have these abilities where you can communicate with the wolves, and they could kind of give you impressions about things that are happening around us to help us and to help you. And of course, Perrin is like, am I going to turn into a werewolf kind of thing? Which, not an unexpected reaction from someone who's grown up in relative obscurity in the Two Rivers. But Elias is kind of describing to him a little bit about what it's about. I'm not a fan of the visual presentation of their abilities. Though I think they did a better job of it here in this episode. Because Perrin looks up and he sees like a deer or an elk or whatever running like in the air. And Elias is telling him the wolves have spotted, this game out there, and they're just letting us know that this elk is out there. And this is how they sort of communicate in emotion and smell and different things like that. But in this TV show, they're giving it this sort of visual look. Now, doing it this way generally makes sense. In the prior episode where Perrin walks into a room and he sees like the past like playing out like a movie superimposed upon the room, didn't like that at all because that's very different from his powers. But if they're tweaking it and kind of going with this, that he's just seeing a sort of quick impression of what wolves are seeing in the moment or recently as it's passed from wolf to wolf and then to Elias and Perrin. Okay, maybe I'll get more comfortable having this kind of change because it's harder to deal in smell and things like that on a visual medium. I'm not a fan of, I keep expecting Perrin to whip out a wand and go, Expecto Patronum, because they look a little too much like Patronus-like with these sort of hazy light trails behind it. So I'm not a big fan of that presentation. I wish they could have tweaked it a little differently because you don't want to remind me of a different franchise. You want to teach me what's cool and interesting and unique about this franchise. But again, minor thing. If you like these visuals, I'm happy that they're good for you. I'm not the biggest fan of them, but I guess they're limited in how they can show this. But as long as it's similar things, like in this episode where it's a brief shot at what a wolf was seeing, and not like him taking the remote and rewinding the DVR and then playing back something that happened, like we got in the previous episodes. So we'll see. We'll see where this goes. But it's finally nice to have a conversation where Perrin and the audience, again, who hasn't read these books, starts to get a little idea of what Perrin's going through. And as a reminder, this was supposed to happen in season 1, because this is what Perrin is experiencing in the first book, and that they completely cut out of the first season because of, and I will forever harp on the stupidity of that, which one's the Dragon Reborn mystery, because it just caused so much lack of character development in season 1. But anyway, we're finally getting book 1 Perrin stuff here. It's happening while book 2 things are happening. And the coming attraction for our next episode, Perrin's going to suddenly be doing book 3 Perrin stuff. So we'll see how that goes. But anyway, it's nice to finally get a conversation between the two of them. And we learn that Elias and the wolves have been following Perrin pretty much since after Shadow Logoth. So it was those wolves when you saw show up in season 1 that helped them escape the Children of the Light. And Elias has been following them ever since. But he's kept his distance because there were Aes Sedai around. And Elias is like, the sisters, the Aes Sedai, they don't like people with abilities that they don't understand. And they don't like that. And they tend to not react well when they come across people who have these sort of powers that exist outside of their one power. This is one of Min's fears you see in the TV show, is very few people actually know what she can do, because she'll just be, snatched up by an Aes Sedai and locked in a room and then be trotted out to look at someone, kind of like she's gone through in the past. And I'll get to that in this episode, because we get a little mini Min backstory in this episode, which is nice as well. But finally, I'm happy that we finally had this Elias Perrin conversation, even if it's a simple short one. So now Perrin can begin to take this journey that he goes through in the books. Let's see. And then we're back to Lan. And then we realize Lan has the letter, the parchment that she bought from Bael Doman in the episode 1. And he's just kind of reading it again and then puts it away. And the other waters, they're all still concerned about him. And we have a conversation between Maxim, one of Alana's waters, and Lan about the bond. Because Aes Sedai's bond a water. And it's this sort of magical bond. And Moiraine had masked the bond before she took Rand from Faldara into the Eye of the World. So one of the things that the show doesn't seem to understand or figure out what it wants to do with what happened to Moiraine was, it hasn't clarified, was she stilled? Was she shielded? Is the bond broken? Or is it just still masked because she masked it before she was either stilled or shielded, so she can't unmask it? But it might still be there, just undetectable at this moment. And the show, some of the conversations that they've had, the characters have had in the show is just keeping this very ambiguous about what actually happened to her. Hopefully we'll get past this and get to the part of the books where she needs her powers, and the show will present some way for her to get her powers back, hopefully. But we'll see. But what was interesting here is Maxim is telling Lan about, again, how each water's relationship with her Aes Sedai is different. She's like, I was bonded, but I'm not comfortable sharing a multi-people bond. I don't want to know what she's doing with Ivan, or anyone else. So he tells her that he tells Lan that Ilana keeps their bond masked when they're not fighting. When there's trouble, she unmasks the bond, and they work like hand in hand, together. But outside of day-to-day activities, she masks the bond so Maxim isn't inundated with all of the Aes Sedai's emotions and all this stuff. Now, that's a tricky thing, because if something unexpected happens, he's not going to necessarily know it, because he's not going to be able to feel it. So, but that's the show's direction that they're going with this character. But it is an interesting scene between Maxim and Lan, because it does teach the audience more about warders and their relationships with the Aes Sedai and with each other. And he's telling Lan that since Ilana masks my bond, I'm still her warder, even though the bond is masked most of the time. It's like, just because your bond with your Aes Sedai is masked doesn't mean you can't still be her warder. The bond itself is irrelevant to you being her warder. Yes, it helps, but you're still you, she's still her, you're still her warder, so you don't think you can't be. So, again, each person is trying to give Lan a purpose, because normally when that bond is broken, the warder loses, like when someone's stilled or gentled. They have no desire to live anymore, and they go and get themselves they go and get themselves killed in battle or something. So they're all trying to just give Lan some sort of purpose to make sure he doesn't lose hope or faith or any of that stuff. Even though, in the show, Lan's just kind of sitting around. So they're not really showing Lan struggling with life or wanting to continue living. They're not showing any of that, but they're showing everyone else concerned about it. So again, trying to fit in things from the books that are important in terms of the relationship between warders and Aes Sedai, but not necessarily doing the greatest job of fitting it in organically into what's happening in the show. But at least they're trying. This is some area where they're actually trying to get it right. And then we're back to Moiraine. And Moiraine has gone to the Foregate and searching for the inn to discover that it's been burned down. And she talks to one of the guards there, like, okay, where is he going? Where's Rand gone? And then, we cut away from Moiraine again, because we're back to the hopping around for just moments between everyone. And then we're back to Rand, and we have Rand and Selene. They're outside of town. They're up on this sort of cliffside, looking down into this valley. And if you hover your mouse over to the left, it mentions the spine of the world. So wherever they are, they might be near that sort of big, giant mountain range that separates the Threefold Land, when the Aiel, from the continent. And Selene is talking more about her past. And Selene is talking more about her past here. And she's sort of spinning tales of partial truths about this relationship that she keeps kind of bringing up this season. And since book readers know who she is, we know who she's talking about, and we know where this is leading. And you feel bad for Rand. Again, as those of us who know the story, you feel bad for Rand, because you know what the man's walking into, and he has no idea what Selene is slowly leading him towards. So it's interesting seeing the dynamic here. Again, their interaction in the show is under completely different circumstances in many respects from the books, but they're trying to accomplish a similar thing. I just really, really, really dislike this Rand that the show's giving us, because he's nothing at all like Rand al'Thor in the books. His personality is just completely different at this point. And so not happy about this Rand that we're getting in this TV show. Because one thing you have to understand about Rand in the books is he has this sort of need to defend women. Like, it's just sort of a chivalrous thing or virtuous thing. It's just how he was raised, that women are to be protected, that if there's danger, you face the danger and you shield them from it. And no matter how much they frustrate you or hurt you, you never harm a woman. So, and then in this TV show, however, we have Rand getting pissed off and grabbing women by the throat and shoving them against walls. So again, nothing at all like Rand from the books. And Rand's like this sort of, like this obsession, if you will, or this absolute that I cannot harm a woman no matter what the circumstances are. Even if my own life is in peril, I can't harm the woman, I have to protect her. That's going to play a significant role as we get deeper into this story, because it's going to put Rand in some precarious positions where, you know, it's like, how do I maneuver around what I'm dealing with here, where this is a woman who wants to kill me, but I can't harm her because she's a woman. So it gets him into precarious situations that he has to find ways to maneuver out and still keeping his principles. And it frustrates everyone around him as well, because some of them are like, you know, it doesn't matter man or woman, if they're trying to kill you, they're your enemy, you kill them. You know, stop putting yourself in unnecessary peril. But TV show Rand here is like, he'll choke her and throw her against the wall and doesn't care. Totally, completely different relationship with women in this show than in the books. And again, that's going to significantly impact things that happen in this, well, in the story that we should be getting, but we're not getting much in the TV show. But she's, again, talking about a relationship from the past, which is this one singular relationship that has dominated her whole world and is going to cause this poor boy all sorts of problems as the story goes on. So, again, even though it's under very different circumstances in the show, I did enjoy this interaction between Celine and Rand because, you know, we know what it's setting up and we know what's coming as a result. This is Celine just going, hey, these are my claws. I'm now sinking them deeply into you, and you don't know it yet, but you're mine, and you're never going to not be mine, and no one's going to be able to get in the way of you being mine, and yes, I'm going to make you suffer if you even think about not being mine. So we know that this is what's happening here, even though Rand has no idea, and if you haven't read the books, you might be able to surmise that she's manipulating him and starting to make the connection that the obsession she's had with this person from her past, she's kind of now beginning to transpose on Rand. But we'll get to that towards the end of this episode. But then we finally get Matt and Min. Matt is out of that room. Finally, 3 episodes in that room. He's now out. He's in a tavern. He's got dice. He's losing at dice, which is, you know, this is early Matt, though, so, you know, that's not to be unexpected, I suppose. His luck hasn't found him yet. But they're in a tavern. He's losing, and Min's beating him in dice, and she's like, goes up to the bartender to get 2 rooms, 1 for each of them, and orders more drinks. She gives him a bunch of money, and she tells him that there's someone going to be coming asking for me, send them up to my room. I don't know who they are, but there's just someone I know I'm supposed to meet later. And then we're away from them, because that was just a very quick, okay, here's where they are now that they're out of that room, and here's what we're setting up. And then we're back to Nynaeve. And then this is probably my favorite scene in this episode, is Nynaeve is back in the accepted chamber. She's kind of sitting there, kind of staring at the 3 arches, still trying to process everything she experienced. And Leandrin finds her there and sits down with her. And Leandrin tells her, you know, briefly about her own accepted test. She doesn't go into details, but she's like talking about how it was a very painful experience for her as well. So she's like, you know, I understand, even though not to perhaps the degree you suffered in there. I understand that you carry pain out of those arches. The pain is real, whether what happens in there, whether what's happened is real or not. You carry that pain out into the rest of your life with you. And she gets Nynaeve to start opening up about what Nynaeve experienced. And Nynaeve tells her about how, she was there for a long time and had a child and was raising her kid. And then Leandrin begins to open up some more about her own son. And she's talking about how she's kept her son a secret for like 80, 90, or to 90 years at this point. And yes, she could have sent her son off to anywhere else. And she understands how selfish it is to keep him close, but hidden. And I think I don't think she comes and outright says it, but she hints that her son's suffering is because he's able to channel. So he has that sort of madness on him. And that's has then led to all these other afflictions as he's descended more and more slowly into that madness. So, but I don't think I don't know if he's been gentled or if he has the ability but can't. And she's just been keeping him close just out of pure selfishness. And again, Leandrin continues to be one of the most interesting changes from book to show. And I like what she actually tells Nynaeve here. And she says, you want to know how we rule this world without collapsing from the pain and loss? You find a piece of this world that belongs to you and you hold on to it. And then when it's finally gone, you find another. And a really, really interesting moment between the two of them. And gives you more insight into not just Leandrin, but what a lot of these other old Aes Sedai who've been Aes Sedai for a while, about how they go through this cycle of finding love and then experiencing love and then loss as they outgrow and outlive everything around them that means something. They lose everything. And the trick is, how do you lose everything while holding this much power without losing yourself? And I think this is something Leandrin's trying to begin to teach Nynaeve. Now, for what reason, for what purpose, remains to be seen in the show. But overall, this is probably my favorite scene in this episode. Nynaeve and Leandrin was the unexpected, interaction that, they've done such a good job at this season. It really is the highlight of the White Tower stuff for me. And I'm curious to see where they're going to take Leandrin's character. If they're going to continue to explore and expand her and make her more complex and perhaps take some side plots from some other Aes Sedai and give them to her to keep her more front and center in the story, it wouldn't surprise me at all. And what they're doing with her character, I would be fine with that. I would actually be happy with that because I think the actress has found something here in this character that she's really having a lot of fun exploring. And it's one of the highlights of the show so far. But then we're back to Lan. Lan and Maxim and Yvonne are meditating, and Maxim doesn't like to meditate, so he leaves. But then we get an interesting conversation between Yvonne. It's now Ivan's turn to talk to Nynaeve, to talk to Lan. So many names. So Alana's had her Lan conversation. Maxim had his Lan conversation. Now Ivan's having his Lan conversation. And, Lan opens up and tells him how hurt it was for Moiraine to basically just dismiss him. And I would say, well, you've never been my equal. You've never really meant as much to me as I've meant to you. And Ivan just laughs at him. I like actually Ivan's response here. And he's like, of course we're not. We're not their equals. They can call down lightning and make mountains. We're never their equal. We are there to see their weakness. We're there as a reminder to them that they're not gods. And yes, to physically protect them while they're enraptured in the one power. But they keep us to remind themselves that they're not gods. And that's a very important role we play in that. in their lives, is that we keep them grounded. It's basically the kind of what the conversation's about. And again, not flat out saying it, but hinting at, hey, you could still be you. You could still be the water she needs, even if she doesn't know she needs it, even though she's refusing to see that she needs it. You could still find a way to be there for her. You just have to figure out what your new dynamic is. And again, each in turn talking to Lan, trying to give him a purpose. And then we cut to Alana has taken the letter that Lan had taken from Moiraine, that Moiraine had gotten from Pel Doman, and she's looking at it. And then we finally cut back to Moiraine again, bouncing around. Like I said, we've gone back and forth this whole episode. Some of the earlier episodes, we spent a little more time with each character. And this one is just boom, 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 all over the place. We keep coming back to them over and over and over again for these short moments. But we have Moiraine is here. She's returned back to her sister's house, and her sister finally corners her. And her sister is like not having it. And she's like, we're having a conversation. So you sit down, shut up, and we're going to talk. And we get backstory about House Damodred, where Moiraine, went off to the White Tower, and how her sister always hoped that she would be able to channel as well. But when she realized she couldn't, she dove into the game of politics and tried her best to keep their house afloat while their father squandered their fortune. And she's had to find a way to keep the house going and find a way to pick up the pieces and begin rebuilding towards being able to climb up the sort of societal noble house like ladder back to a position of more prominence in the great game of houses. And she's been maneuvering for years, and apparently she has a son who she's worked out a deal to marry the queen, and that should restore House Damodred to its full prominence. And she's afraid Moiraine's presence is just going to just destroy all this work she spent decades carefully plotting and doing. And she tells Moiraine, it's like, look, all those contacts you've had here as a Blue Sister, as an Aes Sedai, they're mine. They're my people now. They do my bidding, and they'll only tell you what I tell them to tell you. So you talk to me about what information you need, and I'll get it from who you need to get it from. So kind of putting her foot down. Again, we're back to this whole episode of being about the dynamics of family, which, again, a nice thematic thread throughout the episode, even if so little of what's happening is actually in the books at all. And then we get to like the final three parts of the episode, sort of the final act, if you will. We're back to Egwene and Elaine are talking in Elaine's room. Nynaeve shows up and kicks Elaine out of her own room, and she tells Egwene that some invaders have shown up in the west and have taken Perrin and Loial and the Shan-Chen prisoner, and she's going to Fulm to rescue them. She's not going to abandon them, because again, she's still feeling the trauma of, from her perspective, abandoning this not even real life she had in the Arches. And then Egwene's like, well, I'm coming too, and Nynaeve is trying to protect her. It's like, no, you're a novice. You leave the tower, you're going to get thrown out and you'll never be allowed back. I'm an accepted. I can actually come and go if I need. But Egwene is like, no, I'm not going to do that. I was left behind and couldn't go to the Eye of the World. And we lost Rand because I failed to be there. I failed to protect him. So I'm not going to do that again. I'm not going to not go and fail to protect Perrin. So she convinces Nynaeve to come, that she's going to go. So off they set, trying to find a way. I'm assuming Nynaeve is going to go back to that sort of hidden passage she found from following Liandrin earlier in the season. And then all of a sudden Elaine pops up behind them, and Elaine's like, hey, I'm going too, and there's nothing you can say about it. And then Liandrin pops out and catches all three of them. And then Leandrin finally reveals a little bit more about herself, and that she's been like kind of manipulating these people. And she looks at Elaine and says, "You're a complication," and then unleashes the one power and slams them against the stone wall and knocks the three of the girls out. And that's how their like episode 4 sort of story ends. So, and again, if you've read the books, you know where this is headed, and I'm looking forward to seeing that. We get a lot less White Tower stuff this season than I was hoping, especially since this was supposed to fit in as much of book 3 as they could fit in as well. But now that they're they're going to be leaving the White Tower for the rest of the season, all that book 3 White Tower stuff, I have no idea when or if they're ever going to be able to do any of that in this show. So curious to see how that's going to impact the story going forward. But then we're back to Min, and Min is having a dream, and we get to see Min's aunts, and her 2 aunts kind of were using her to make money, sitting her down, like having like a fortune teller, having people come in, and Min would see her visions and tell their fate and all this stuff. And then she wakes up from that dream, and Ishamael is sitting there in her room. And he's sort of mocking her and saying, look, she's like shocked to find out, because in this show, Ishamael just loves to tell everybody who he is. Yeah, I'm the father of lies. I'm this, I'm that. He has no qualms telling everybody he meets that he's a Forsaken. And Min is finally the first person who actually looks terrified learning this, because every other time he said it, there hasn't been all that much of a reaction from people. But Min is actually quite terrified here. And he tells her, it's like, look, I know Leandrin promised you that she could take away this power you have to see visions. And it's like, I said, I can't take that away from you. She was lying to you, to manipulating you, to get you to me so that I can use you. But if you do what I want, I can take away that curse, so you won't see visions anymore. Because I have that power. The eye said I don't. So, but you have to do what I want, and which is what Leandrin wants you to do, which is to take Matt to Carhian. So, not taking Matt to Falma, which is what I expected we were going to get. Matt's being taken to Carhian. So, why the hell they're taking Matt to Carhian? No idea. Is Rand still going to be there? The way this episode ends, which ends on a scene with Rand, I don't think Rand's still going to be there, so not really sure why in the world Ishamael wants Min to take Matt to Carhian, but that's what they're doing. And then we switch to Rand for the finale of the episode and the big reveal. We get the payoff for the cold opening scene of Ishamael releasing a Forsaken. So Rand wakes up. It's at night. He's sleeping next to Selene is asleep. There's a small campfire there. There's trees around them. And then he looks and there's a cottage there. And so he gets up and to kind of looking at the cottage. And then a Myrddraal, kind of melts out of the shadows and attacks him. And he has his sword out. And the Fade just like disarms him with the sword really quick. Again, we're about to end halfway through season 2. Rand is supposed to be having a big kind of sword fight at the end of the season, and the show is kind of reminding us Rand don't know how to use a sword. So I'm curious to see where the hell they're going to go with that when we get to it. But, Lanfear wakes up and he jumps in front of her to protect her, because we get to see a little bit of Rand from the books where the woman has to be protected. And then he starts channeling, and he realizes Selene can see him channel. And he pretty much he melts the Fade. And then he's like, Selene is like scared of him, or she's pretending to be scared. She's pretending to not know he could channel, and she's afraid of him. And then he says he's going to go. And he's like, I understand, I'll leave. And he goes, and he says, this is the quote from the show that is going to get Rand in a lot of trouble for the rest of his story when it comes to this character. They say when men go mad, they kill the people they love first. So I'll go as far away as I can. And Celine's eyes like light up. And she's like, are you saying you love me? Which is, okay, claws sunk into the man, not letting go. And then she takes him inside the cabin, this sort of cottage, and puts him down in the bed, gets on top of him, and then she finally starts revealing who she is, and she starts to channel. And yes, in the books, you know, a man can't see when a woman's channeling because the man can only channel and see Sidon, and the woman can only channel and see sort of Sidon. But not in the TV show. Everyone can see everyone channeling in the TV show, for the most part. And she starts channeling, and she reveals that, you know, she can do this as well. And then she's telling him, looking down at him as she's channeling, and she says, you need to give someone the chance to love all of you. They might not, but you need to give them the chance. And then we cut away real quick to Alana and her two waters. And Alana is reading the parchment to her two waters. And it's the prophecy of Lanfear, daughter of the night, has returned to the world. And then we hear the voiceover from the beginning with Mishamael's blood is, you know, blood was, all that stuff. And then as we cut back to Rand, Celine is channeling in front of him, kind of revealing that she can channel. And then all of a sudden, a sword like spikes out of her chest and then comes out. And then Moiraine pops up and just slits her, Celine's throat with her knife. And the body falls down. And Rand just loses his mind and just throws Moiraine against the wall, with the one power, grabs her by the throat as well, because, like I said, TV Rand grabs women by the throat. Book Rand would never do such a thing if he could help it. And she tells him, it's like, that's not Celine, that's Lanfear, that's a Forsaken. We have to get the hell out of here, run. And they take off. And then the episode ends with Lanfear's dead body, eyes open, just staring, and then all of a sudden Lanfear blinks. And you can see like what looks like the weaves beginning to heal the wound on her neck. And that's how the episode ends. So we finally get our Lanfear reveal. And again, not happy about how much they're changing book events. But this Rand, sort of Celine, Rand, and then Lanfear reveal, as far as the way the book's handling it, I liked. Again, I would much rather have the book, because Rand is not learning anything he needs to learn that he's learning in the books that he desperately needs to learn for book 3 and book 4. So I, again, don't know how they're going to handle all that when we get to that part of the story, because Rand should have developed skills that he desperately needs that he's not developing here at all. But overall, that's episode 4. We're halfway through the season. So I guess I shouldn't be surprised that we got our Lanfear reveal in this episode. And a lot of this episode, like I said, was spent putting in place the driving of things that are going to push all the characters forward finally. Because they've spent half a season, like nobody really doing much of anything. But now Moiraine is back with Rand, and they're trying to get the hell away from Lanfear. We have 2 Forsaken. We have Min being manipulated by a Forsaken to take Mat to Carian for some reason. I'm assuming Lan is going to finally make a decision and stop sitting on his ass. And so hopefully episode 5 we'll see Lan beginning to be proactive again. And we know Alana and her waters are going to be going back to the tower to get involved in events there. And so there should be a lot of things beginning to happen for the final second half of the season. And in the preview for episode 5, we are getting Avienda. And yes, the show is taking Gaul's introduction in the books and giving that introduction to Avienda. So I am not happy about that at all. It just makes me think that we're just not going to get Gaul in this TV show at all. which would be a pretty big change as far as I'm concerned. But we'll see. We'll see. I'm very trepidatious about what the Aiel are going to be like in this TV show, because like I've mentioned before, my biggest worry is trying to translate the Aiel to live action. I don't know how they're going to be able to do it right, but you know, we'll see. Man, I really should have put the ND filter on my camera, on my lens, because it's like the sun is like blasting through afternoon sun. But anyway, sorry for the like overexposure here. But yeah, so that's episode 4. A lot of conversations, not a lot of things happening, but just a lot of little pieces put in place to set up the second half of the season. Hold on a second. It would help if I have the proper screen up. Okay, come on, find me. Of course. So, let's see if this stupid thing will find me. And absolutely no idea why my autofocus is not working all of a sudden. Doesn't make any sense. Because this lens like focuses right away. Okay. Oh well. Let's take that back off and see what it does. All right. No idea why my lens is no longer focusing. Not the best way to wrap up a live stream. But sometimes cameras just do really bizarre things. So hold on again a second.